All right, good morning. Today we are going to be looking at a new module. This week we are going to start talking about shape. And so on our homepage, as we scroll down, you'll see the Intro to Shape module is posted. You can go in and start looking. We're going to have the video link to today's lesson will be posted here. Of course, this week we'll have an art assignment that'll be posted here for your submission. And we'll make art later this week. So let's take a look at this shape module. And so last week and the past couple weeks we've been talking about line. Line is the most basic of the elements. Well, shape is the second most basic. Once you start connecting lines, you start creating some shapes. Before we begin, it's that time again. Sit back, relax, and celebrate the beginning of a new journey into the world of shapes by watching this video.
In art, you'll find shapes of all colors and kinds. Each and every shape begins with a line. Repeat the shapes one by one to create a pattern that's sure to stun. Geometric shapes have clear edges and lines. How many of these special shapes can you find? They're here and here and here and here. In art, you never know where they'll appear. These pentagons and octagons are geometric shapes, you know. They create symmetry that helps pieces of artwork flow. Geometric shapes are cool, but organic shapes break all the rules. None of them are quite the same. They're flowy, wild, and can't be tamed. The curve of this dragon and the bend of his tail are organic shapes, impressive in scale. These shapes have movement. These super shapes you see all come together to create unity. Some shapes are flat, while others pop right out in 3D. A square can become the cube it always dreamed it would be. To find inspiration for their art, artists look all around. From real life, like these flowers by Georgia O'Keeffe, to the depths of their imaginations. How neat! So use shapes with your art in any way you please. Let your inspiration flow. Are you ready? Get set. Let's go.
All right. And couple of things in there that I really want to point out. When we talk about those shapes going from two-dimensional to three-dimensional, going from a shape to what we call form, we're going to be thinking about how can we show that in a two-dimensional space, like in a drawing. How can we show something three-dimensional? That's one of the fun things we're going to do this week. So a few of the things, we're not going to have to touch on all of these, but we're going to look at how we can identify shape and how it's used in works of art. We're going to look at different types of shapes, those organic shapes, those geometric shapes. We're going to look at the types of materials and different ways, though, the techniques that you can have for creating shapes. And then we're going to look at that idea of, again, that two-dimensional versus that three-dimensional concept of shape. How's a two-dimensional shape different than that three-dimensional form? Oh, I don't like these. Oh, well, I'm going to skip those. Forming shapes. So we're going to identify the differences between two-dimensional and three-dimensional shapes. And so remember, when we have a third dimension, it's called a form. So think of a two-dimensional thing and three-dimensional sort of like this. This is a stack of Post-it notes. First of all, let's start off with a single Post-it note. If I have one single Post-it note, okay, this is essentially a two-dimensional surface because it's got height and it's got width, but it really doesn't have much depth. So this is two-dimensional. We're thinking of this as two-dimensional. It has one dimension being height, a second dimension being width, but it doesn't really have that third dimension, that 3D thing, that third D, which is depth, if it went back this direction. But if I have a stack of them, well, now I'm beginning to get a form, because it's not just two-dimensional now. I have height and width, but now I'm starting to get depth. It goes back into space. So now I have 1, 2, 3 dimensions. So where we think of a two-dimensional shape, this would be a three-dimensional form. 3 dimensions, 2 dimensions. And so when we think about drawing a three-dimensional form on a two-dimensional surface, like a piece of paper or our computer screens, that sort of thing, we're going to start thinking about how we can demonstrate what makes a form look different than its shape. So if we look at a square is a two-dimensional geometric shape, and those geometric shapes are going to be shapes you might find in geometry class, like circles and triangles and squares and rectangles. Simple shapes that have very defined borders and edges. We can often measure, easily what's inside that space, how much area they contain. If it's a geometric form, we'll talk about how much cubic feet, how much volume it can have, that sort of thing. We think about the space, but they're very not easily, but they're measured. It can be easily measured, if you will. Versus an organic shape, and organic shapes can be crazy shapes like clouds and rocks and trees. They have undefined edges, so we often think of geometric shapes as things that maybe man has made, and man-made things, types of shapes, versus those organic shapes that are more natural. And so this square, and a square is defined by having 4 equal sides. If 2 of the sides are longer, it becomes a rectangle. But when all 4 sides are exactly the same, then we have the same length. We have a square. If we have 3 dimensions of all the same, so if it's 4 feet tall and 4 feet wide and also 4 feet deep, now we have a cube. A cube is the form, the 3-dimensional form of that 2-dimensional shape, square. Okay? So now we're going to talk about those organic shapes. Organic shapes, again, are those kind of weird shapes that they're sort of free-flowing, unstructured. And so they're often things we think about being in nature, trees, leaves, petals of flowers, the shapes of animals are all organic. So we can take a look at how artists use organic shapes. So these are a couple cool and interesting pieces here. Late in his life, Henri Matisse did these beautiful collages. He would cut these cool shapes out of all kinds of neat paper or fabric, and he would put them on different surfaces and collage, paste them on. And so this is one that kind of focuses on all these very organic shapes that maybe they're leaves or some type of underwater plants, or maybe they're paint splatters. You just don't know. They're kind of these beautiful, interesting organic shapes. On the right, Chihuly made these beautiful glass works very often. Now, he would have these big twisting pieces of glass that would come out and do all kinds of crazy stuff. And his works of art made use of what looked like these sort of vines that would grow. Again, all made of glass. Really neat. So think about the material that he's using to make those shapes. Glass. That's pretty cool. There's a glass blower over in Danville by the name of Stephen Powell, one of the more famous glass blowers in the country. He does amazing work. So think about the materials. Henri Matisse used paper. It was 2-dimensional flat, and he cut his shapes out. Chihuly made a three-dimensional form out of his shapes, these big three-dimensional twisting things made of glass. So we're thinking about this, not just the shapes, not just the forms, but how do artists use them and what do they make them out of? So we talked a little bit about partitioning shapes last week. And when we think about how we can look at a whole shape, like a circle or a square, and when we partition it, we're taking that complete shape and we're going to segment it in some way, break it apart a little bit. When an artist chooses not to use that whole shape, we're going to, and starts to breaking it down into those different little pieces, we call that partitioning. You're making it into different portions. You're partitioning different parts, if you will. So if we cut a shape in half, right, we can get different parts. If we cut it in half down the middle, we can get equal parts that way. If we cut it in two different ways, we can get those what we call little wedge pie, pie pieces, like little wedges. If you've ever played Trivial Pursuit, you get those little pie pieces. But if we call it in half, that's a semicircle. Half of a circle is a semicircle. When we cut a piece of paper in half, we can cut it in different ways. This is a rectangle, so they can cut it in half a couple different ways. We can quarter it, or partition it into quarters, which is 1/4. Think about a quarter is 1/4 of $1. Well, a quarter of a piece of paper is 1/4 of that piece of paper. So we're going to stop here today and talk a little bit about our studio time and what you all are going to do this week in our studio. And so we're going to focus on, again, how do we use shape? How do we use color? We're going to add some color into this a little bit. So ours is going to be a little different than what theirs is. But if you have paper, pencil, marker, crayons, whatever you want to use available, please bring them. If you don't have anything, I'm going to show you how to do this work of art this week on the chrome canvas like we do. And we're going to look here at the end of the lesson, if you're in class today live, at a PowerPoint that kind of looks at some of those organic and geometric shapes. I'm going to have that PowerPoint also posted, so if you're watching this lesson asynchronously, you can also check out those organic and geometric shapes. Okay, thanks guys. Have a great day.